We're all set to bring to you the CEO's movement working towards carbon neutrality, a very interesting session that we've lined up with our moderator, Professor Utkarsh, Majmudar, member of the Board of Governors, IIM Raipur, who will be having very, very interesting conversations with our speakers. First, we will be joined by Mr. Puneet Chandok, President, India and South Asia, Amazon Internet Service Private Limited, along with Mr. Keshav, our Murugesh, Group CEO, WNS Global Services. Then we will also have a very interesting conversation of Professor Utkarsh Majmudar along with Mr. Vipin, Sondhi, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Ashok, Leyland. So a lot happening in this interesting session that we've lined up for you. Please do listen in.
Thank you, Isha, for the introductions. This is a very interesting thing that we have today. The climate change is upon us. We see floods, fires, droughts happening all over the world. What's also happening is that the Glasgow summit has put a strong spotlight on climate change and net zero. The IPCC report has painted a very grim picture. And that is something that we have to worry about. And corporations have a central role to play here. There are pressures which are coming from customers, from investors, from the judiciary, from the regulators. So a whole host of things that are happening, and corporations are at the center of all this. So let's start this by asking maybe Puneet first. What are the perspectives that you have about business, about running businesses in an environmentally friendly way? What kind of business models do you see coming up in the future?
First of all, Professor, it's a privilege to be here with you. And you raised it, I think you set it up really well. And I'll just start by saying that nature does not negotiate, right? And we sometimes say it wrong when we say the planet needs saving. I think it's all of us who needs to be saved, and we need to do this for our children. So I think having an environmentally friendly business model is no longer a nice to do. It's critical to all our survival. And I'm now seeing governments and I'm seeing business stakeholders across the board start to work with urgency on this. And I'll give you a data point. There was a recent research from 451 Research, and they said the data center market in India will grow to roughly 580,000 square meters by 2024. India is now the fastest growing market in Asia when it comes to data center buildouts. And as data centers continue to surge, so will energy consumption. So it's really important for us to get this right now, right? We need energy efficiency. And it's not just private players, it's not just businesses, it's governments, it's multiple organizations that need to come together. And cloud is a way for us to get to this energy efficiency. I'll give you another example, a data point. India today has roughly 1,200 odd largely publicly traded businesses, so large publicly traded businesses. Even if a quarter of them, only 25% of them were to put 1 megawatt of IT workloads onto the cloud, that would actually save the equivalent of roughly a year's worth of emissions from 160,000 Indian households, so a year's worth of emissions, right? So I would just say technology and cloud are the enablers in this, and we all have to be thinking about this much more seriously and with a lot more urgency than we've traditionally done.
Keshav, what would your thoughts be? How do you look at business models going forward?
Yeah, so Professor, again, from my perspective, also really a delight to be here in the midst of such knowledgeable people on this subject. And clearly, I think that there is no gray area, as far as this subject is concerned. We have to run our businesses in a very sustainable and environmental, friendly manner. And these words now have become business necessities and not just differentiators, I would say. Now, from my perspective, I think that environmental sustainability should really have two goals. The first is to be more socially responsible and to have a positive impact on the health of the environment. Now, all of us are aware, that no business of ours really operates in isolation. We create value from the physical environment in which we are all operating. And therefore, as organizations, we should therefore demonstrate responsibility towards that environment that is contributing so much to us. So that is the first clear goal, I would say. The second, I would talk about is to provide a competitive advantage or place the business on a level playing field in the market. So that is one of the most important goals of sustainability or environmental sustainability, I think. Now, let's look at all the factors that support the business case and why it is smart for businesses actually to follow this. First and foremost, environmentally sustainable practices present few or no risks to business operations. That's very, very telling if you ask me. The second is that while environmental responsibility is not just about compliance or early movers, it will hold a very, early movers rather will hold a very competitive, advantage as it becomes regulatory followed. So over a period of time, you should expect that the regulator will start monitoring this, right? And therefore, the faster we get into this, I think the better. And the third, I would say, is there is significant potential to reduce expenses in the medium to long term, especially in the area of energy efficiency. I think all of us have seen it in our businesses. And finally, it also enhances your brand reputation and attracts investors, clients, and many other stakeholders to a company that follows some of these norms. And we are seeing in the US what is the impact now of ESG, right? And how ESG is now ruling the roost in terms of investment psyche and philosophy. And just to give you a nugget, WNS announced its sustainability report a few months ago, and we found a coverage analyst, an investor analyst, actually monitored or looked at this report and all our public filings over the last many years, compared it with 18 other tech companies that they cover, and ranked all these companies on ESG scores. We were lucky that we came highest at 81%, but I just want everyone to understand that analysts are actually monitoring what we say, what we do, and how we behave in this area.
So true. And Keshav, since you focused on how important this is from a corporate perspective, could you share some light on how WNS is building a sustainable infrastructure in terms of how your data centers, etc.? So how are you going about doing this?
Yeah, so, first and foremost, I will say the statistics globally around data center infrastructure efficiencies itself are telling a very positive story. So, we are part of that overall game, I would say. So I don't want to try to say that we are doing something very special. Yes, we try to do what we need to, but generally it's moving in a positive direction. First and foremost, in terms of data center capacity, there has now been a 500 to 700% growth, but only a minor increase in terms of energy consumption. That is telling, in terms of how we are all focusing on it. Plus, the number of data centers and the overall compute capacity has now boomed. While overall carbon dioxide output has increased at a considerably lower pace. It's actually very positive. I would also want to focus on PUE, or power usage efficiency, which was introduced as a global standard, I believe, in 2006, and it measures the ratio of energy used by the IT equipment in a data center to the energy used by the entire, kind of data center. In 2020, the average, was about 1.59 for PUE. And from our point of view, what we are doing is we are focused a lot on, some of the newer trends. For example, if you look at all the new data centers, they're built now like Lego bricks. Now, if one system goes down, then, it is unplugged and a new one is plugged in, with little or no impact to operation. Then physical infrastructure is being now given the flexibility to dial up or, down heat removal and for power delivery. Energy harvesting is now the norm, or what we call power harvesting is also becoming very, very popular. We are very much involved in all of that. And I would say that using of gas, backup generators instead of diesel also helps devise, grid balancing schemes, which is something that we do. In addition to this, I think from an ESG point of view, there are many other things that we do with our entire ecosystem, which is our vendors, our partners, in terms of how are they also practicing some of this in order to earn the right to be a partner or vendor of WNS. So I just want to mention that, all of this actually has resulted in that very positive score I spoke about from a sustainability report point of view for WNS.
Thank you. And Puneet, you are part of a group that runs the web services for the large number of companies across the world. And being a global player, how do you look at it, and how do you improve the sustainability of your infrastructure?
First of all, Professor, I really like the way Keshav framed the two goals, and I couldn't agree with him more, right? Which is, it's no longer a nice to do or a differentiator, it's a question of survival. So thank you for that, Keshav. I think just building on what Keshav said, Keshav shared some really interesting statistics on this, right? And I'll give you 3 statistics just to kind of make this even more clearer. And these are statistics to compare cloud infrastructure versus on-prem data centers. And I'll just start with the AWS infrastructure. The AWS infrastructure today, Professor, is 3.6 times more energy efficient than the median of enterprise data centers that we surveyed in the US, 3.6 times. And that's not enough. We're continuously increasing the efficiency by custom hardware, software. I'll give you an example. We innovated with Graviton 2, which is our most power efficient processor till now. And it is just an incredible innovation to make sure that we energy efficient, at the same time building capacity and processing power. So we're really innovating at the chip level to ensure that we're building sustainable power for the future of the workloads that will come onto the cloud. The second statistic I'll give you is, if you look at on-prem data centers typically in Asia, and again, we did a study, the typical server utilization in an on-prem data center is roughly 15% or south of that, only 15%. And if you look at cloud-based data centers, the utilization is 50% or above, right? And given this difference in utilization, cloud servers can achieve energy savings of more than 67% compared to on-prem data centers. Again, just a massive shift as we move workloads to the cloud. And I'll give you one last statistic, which is my favorite. If you take a 1 megawatt enterprise data center today, you move it to the cloud, you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by roughly 2,400 metric tons per year. And this is the equivalent of removing 2,000 cars from the road, 2,000 cars, right? And for people in India today in multiple cities, this could be a real gift, right? So again, going back to the theme, technology and cloud, as Keshav said, are part of the solution as we move towards a more sustainable future.
Oh, great. That's very heartening to listen to both of you, and the kind of improvements that you guys are talking about. There's a strong linkage between innovation and digital, and that is something that is becoming more and more common these days. And at the same time, as brand leader, you have to sort of look at issues around circular economy, green offerings, green supply chains, etc., and all in some sense link up. So how do you think this linkage between innovation and digital is going to move going forward? So maybe Puneet first.
You're right, Professor. I mean, this is linked, right? I mean, innovation has to drive a lot of the thinking and the ideas that Keshav and I spoke about. And I think as Amazon, we are fully committed. And I'll give you again 2 or 3 examples to bring this to life. The first is decarbonization. I mean, as Amazon India, we're committed to including 10,000 electric vehicles in our fleet by 2025, again, to make sure that we're doing this in a sustainable way. Another idea that we're doing globally is what we call shipment zero. And our goal is to deliver 50% of Amazon shipments with a net zero carbon footprint by 2030. And just to bring this to life, a shipment zero is an order that travels through facilities which are powered by 100% clean energy from wind and solar projects, right? So throughout the supply chain, till the time the pack reaches your home, we're going to try and make sure that we're reducing our carbon footprint. Sustainable packaging, we all order from Amazon, so we see the packaging. We've reduced the weight of outbound packaging by roughly 36%. And actually eliminated more than 1 million tons of packaging material since 2015. That's the equivalent of 2 billion shipping boxes. A lot more to do, And then finally, I think we're committed with the climate pledge, Professor, which is a $2 billion commitment to net zero carbon across our businesses by 2040, which is roughly 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement, but we want to get there faster. And as AWS, we're steadily moving towards using 100% renewable energy by 2025. Across our infrastructure, right? So I think the point is we are all moving in the right direction, as Keshav said, but we got to keep acting more boldly and quickly and with urgency on this.
And Keshav, your thoughts?
Yeah, so lots of very interesting statistics Puneet has thrown at us, and very impressive to see what AWS is doing in the area. I spoke about PUE earlier, and if you look at the hyperscalers, obviously Amazon and Facebook and some of these other companies are all part of that group. They are the leaders. When I said 1.50 is an accepted average, actually these people are operating at from 1.20, they brought it down to 1.18 as an average. Some of them would do better, some slightly worse maybe. But it's interesting, there is a EU-funded project that is operating, by some university at a location called Boden, which is very near the Swiss Alps. And they have managed to bring it down to 1.01, which means that's the potential also. Of course, the advantage is that they are able to get the Arctic winds, cooling their entire systems down, free of cost. And all of us can't really achieve that. And therefore, back to your question, we see our environmental, our footprint and dependence on natural resources actually increasing. As we grow, because of the nature of our operations, we will have limited levers, if you ask me, to directly impact few of our environmental parameters. However, we want to, continue to monitor and manage all our environmental, performance in order to mitigate the climate risk, as well as enhance all organizational, resilience. So in terms of just some efforts, for example, to increase productivity or, increase energy productivity in office infrastructure. Some of the focus areas are lighting and heating, ventilation, air conditioning, all the HVAC systems in the office. We are among the first organizations to change the set points for AC units in all our IT, data centers from 18 degrees to 21 degrees centigrade, right? Second thing is energy management initiatives, for optimized consumption are focused on, and server virtualization, for more than 30% of our physical servers is an area to provide energy savings that we are all the time focused on. Similarly, our efforts actually have been recognized, very well. So, for example, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency awarded us recently the National Energy Conservation Award for 2020. And we also received another award, which is Energy and Environmental, Foundation Group Clean India Award for 2021. The reason I'm saying this is because I want the listeners to understand that these awards matter in this area. I don't know about other areas. But in this area, it matters because that is the legacy we are leaving for our children and for the next generation, right? So I just want to mention that, on the one hand, we are constantly focused on ensuring that we're doing all of this and both, as you put it, innovation as well, accelerating innovation in this area is completely focused on. But at the same time, we are also not removing our business hat, because we know that only as long as we're able to create those surpluses can we invest in this area as well.
So as a brand leader, how do you sort of look at this drive towards climate stewardship, circular economy, green offerings, green supply chains? All these are becoming big buzzwords, so to speak. And how do you see this going forward?
Thank you, Professor Utkarsh. And again, thank you to ETH for inviting me. It's a great question, very pertinent, and we actually completely support this drive towards climate stewardship, circular economy, green offerings, many of them merge into one, green supply chain. There are no easy answers, Utkarsh. It's obvious that everyone on our planet is coming to terms with the basic vulnerability of our society and people to extreme events, destructive wildfires, flash floods that cause loss of life, cause unprecedented damage, and often exceed our capacity to cope. So climate change is a threat to humanity in many ways, like COVID-19 has become. It is something that each one of us, each corporation, each individual has to be sensitive to. For example, at Ashok Leyland, we focus on a few elements of global warming. 65% of our electricity consumption is from renewable sources, and we are enhancing this. 700,000 trees across our manufacturing plants, and we remain net water positive. So a small amount of work, but I think small amounts of work can make a big difference if we all add it up. Now, a circular economy really is restorative, regenerative by design, and it replaces the end-of-life concept with restoration. So the use of renewable energy and elimination of waste through superior design of whether it's materials or products, systems, business models, and the circular economy focuses, as you know, Professor, you know it better than any of us, on the 3R concept, which is to reduce, to reuse, and to recycle. Now, from our Ashok Leyland standpoint, reduce means offering mobility as a service so that fewer people need to own a vehicle. We make mass transport. Reuse refers to certain aspects of refurbishment carried out to make the product last longer. So we retrofit wherever necessary to upgrade. And recycle is the means of feeding waste generated as raw material for certain industries or recycling parts from a scrapped vehicle or industry. And you've heard the new scrappage policy of the government, which will bring all fundamentally steel users and other users together into a circular economy. Green offerings and green supply chain to me are about the journey towards net zero. So tailpipe emission is where we measure emissions, but this is different from net zero. That needs to be clearly understood. In my opinion, or our opinion, organizations must commit to ESG goals, and the journey of ESG is a collective effort, essentially encompassing the organization and its stakeholders, especially and including the supply chain. So the journey towards green offerings and green supply chain covers the entire ecosystem, Professor Saab. I hope you would agree. It would cover design, it would cover sourcing, it would cover manufacturing, packaging, logistics. We can't forget packaging and logistics, product end use, and then finally recycle and reuse rather than just let it be. So again, from our point of view and Ashok Leyland standpoint, we are constantly trying to give back more than we take. In fact, all of us have to give back more than we take from society and from the environment. We mentioned the use of alternative energy and water positivity. We minimizing resources using connected machines. Our machines are connected. Responsible sourcing, so you decide who to source from if that source is responsible in what they do, and efficient packaging and the use of multimodal transport. So apart from the above, we have a Road to School program which we started in 2015, and that's extremely close to our heart. Today, 800 schools with over 70,000 children benefit from this initiative. And we've recently kickstarted a program in Jammu and Kashmir with 36 schools and 3,500 children. So I'd like to conclude by saying that ESG in its entirety, or greening in its entirety, is everyone's responsibility. And a leader must drive it to ensure the business remains sustainable and society is healthy. That is, I think, my response to your question.
Thank you so much. That has been a great explanation about how you do things and how things can get improved. Moving on, how do you look at innovation? That there's becoming an increasing link between digital and green developments, and how do you look at it, especially in terms of innovations?
Yeah, I think that's another great question, Professor. The automotive space is in a way looked at by society with a lens. You know, we're not often the best people. Everybody uses automobiles, but as automotive industry, we're not looked at very well for some reason. So the automotive industry is also an early mover and trendsetter within the manufacturing segment when it comes to adoption of new technology. Now, to accelerate green and digital development, the plan for us is to ensure that we integrate sustainability, ESG into the business process and not just have a standalone sustainability strategy. There can be nothing like a standalone strategy on sustainability. Now, some of the ways that to set the organization on the path of digitalization to drive sustainability. One would be embracing product as a service as part of the business model afresh. So product as a service means leasing models on the rise, which are on the rise, combining data from products and users to improve asset utilization, optimal utilization of assets. The second is reducing environmental impact through the supply chain. Within that, optimizing environmental impacts within operations is important, but its positive impact will be hindered if not deployed through the supply chain. Today's technology will enable us to connect that seamlessly. And the second is the use of data sharing, which can provide visibility and accountability, often in real time, thereby reducing environmental impact. We, all of us, Utkarsh, you, Jyotsna, ourselves, must integrate sustainability considerations as a strategic imperative to ensure the organization remains resilient and remains competitive. Data can help drive efficiencies across our processes, supply chain, sourcing, and it also helps us keep an eye on our products to ensure they are productive and up all the time. Now, coming back to ways of accelerating innovation, just suggest 5 possible strategies. 1, start with the core. So weave sustainable practices into our business's core, which will make sustainability efforts work for the long term. Setting a sustainability vision for the organization would show that the team and the customers, it shows to everybody, especially the customers, but other stakeholders, that we mean business. Now you look at the power of zero, the power of shunya. Zero defect, zero wastage, zero congestion, which means mass transport, zero accident, zero downtime, zero debt that the bankers won't like, but well, I think we should focus on that, and zero imports. Now, I'm not saying that we should de-link ourselves from the global supply chain, but to the extent we can be Atmanirbhar, we should be, because we should create employment within our own country. The second is focus on value proposition, which is create products that are differentiated and sustainable, which means whatever we do, we must do it well, and we must do it better, and we must do it for more people. Third is plan for the future. So the sustainable practices must be scalable, because that's the only way to grow. The fourth is how are the resources produced, and also how are they regenerated. So it's extremely important to consider what resources go into production and how sustainable are the practices at our end, at our vendors' end, thereby vendors covering the entire ecosystem. And the processes should try to limit the use of water, electricity, and of course, reduce emissions to the extent possible. But I think what is vital, which we've not looked at, Utkarsh, as a country, which we are now looking at, is whether we are recycling, whether we are reusing, and we are giving time for regenerations. Finally, and the fifth, how are resources obtained and transported? So sourcing locally is an excellent way to limit impact, since raw materials travel a shorter distance to factories, warehouses, consumers, and ocean freight is a major source of CO2 emission globally. So organizations at the end of the day have to find their own ways of giving back to society, and this effort is a continual effort, and only then will organizations remain sustainable. So that, I hope I've been able to address your second question.
Great thoughts, Mr. Sondhi. So some really interesting ideas on how we can go forward on this. So how are you focused on creating a sustainable infrastructure? Because infrastructure is the core of what you guys do.
Yeah, well, you talk of the efficiency of data centers, infrastructure, efficiency of servers, etc. That itself is a big one. I understand that the International Energy Agency estimates that 1% of all global electricity is used by data centers. And by 2025, data centers are estimated to consume 1/5 of the world's power supply, owing to increased interaction. You know, even when before this, and thanks for putting this question because I was reading about it, didn't realize that 1/5 of the world's power supply would be through internet and smart technology interactions. Now, this energy demand goes into powering the servers. They in turn produce heat, we know that, and need to be cooled. And the moment that requires, then you need energy. Now, to reduce the data center's carbon footprint, I guess a smart combination of innovation technology is needed to reach net zero emissions. So 6 possible solutions which we adopt at Ashok Leyland. One is consolidation of smaller servers and server virtualization, which is dividing a server into several small ones through a software to minimize wastage. 2, AI-based monitoring and management, which is data storage and server operations. 3, on-demand on-demand services, example AWS, as opposed to private data centers. 4th is to kill zombie servers, ones that are no longer needed. 5 is to use of air economizers, which is the outside air, and also through in-rack cooling. And 6, power over the Ethernet, which is PoE lighting, intelligent lighting that uses sensors to detect motion. So I guess most people would be using that. Now, in the times ahead, organizations will keep tapping into data more often than they ever did. And the demand for data processing will go up many-fold over the next few years. We all know that. It's well published. Now, on the contrary, the push for net zero and ESG is also seeing a rise across organizations. Now, the twin trends of consolidation and deployment of efficient practices and smart technologies will greatly reduce the overall impact of these facilities. We just have to use smart technologies. And in a decade, a significant risk, Utkarsh, exists from rapidly growing demand for computer processing, and potential remains for substantial efficiency gains. But investments will be necessary in next-gen computing, storage, heat removal technologies that will require to avoid steep energy use increase. So renewable power now comes in. So renewable power sourcing is therefore essential to minimize the climate implications arising from data center energy usage. This was a great question you asked because it helped me also get very sensitive to the data centers and the enormous energy or the enormous heat that they generate, which needs to be cooled. Thank you.
Thank you. And this in some sense is very interesting because most of the companies are becoming data companies in some sense. So finally, what is your perspective on the increasing demand by businesses for an environmentally friendly business model? So how do you see this whole concept of environmentally friendly business model going forward?
So the question is, what is sustainability? And we need to understand that sustainability is a measure of something's ability to continue. And the second is it meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the need of our children and grandchildren. Too often, that's forgotten about. What is the need for sustainability and what is our end objective? The need for sustainability is clear. We've spoken about it. And I think all of us, societies, are waking up to the urgency of an ailing planet, rising seas, toxic pollution, out of control wildfires, which we mentioned before, and new infectious diseases, which we are seeing as we speak. The end objective for us is that sustainability and sustainable competitive advantage have to fuse coherently for organizations. So what are the elements of a sustainable business? That's what you ask. A sustainable business needs a holistic approach. It covers or encompasses the ecosystem at the very least, supply chain and a delivery chain. And I'd like to go to 4 elements of a sustainable business. One is diversity. people, resources, investment. 2 is modularity as different to matrix organizations, which is to shield certain divisions of the organization, example, product development, aftermarket, information technology, from shocks in this world of uncertainty. The 3rd is buffer or spare resources. Innovation requires investments and space to change direction. Organizations must incubate a culture of innovation and, if possible, reward failure in the context of innovation, but fail fast and then move on very, very quickly. And the 4th is understanding the rhythm, which is resilient businesses think not about constant growth, but rather about cyclical processes, cycles of growth and contraction, cycles of production and consumer purchase patterns. So a business that ensures self-sustenance is, at the end of the day, more sustainable. And one of the ways to do it is by ensuring the supply chain repurposes waste. And this, to me, is going to take some concerted effort from all of us across the value chain. It's a huge amount of effort, but we have to do it. And we have to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you for providing great insights into how the companies are moving towards carbon neutrality. It's been a wonderful and a fascinating session. The time has been short, but it's been worth it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Professor Majmudar. It was a pleasure having you here as our moderator. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Sondhi for sharing his views with us. And of course, we had a conversation with Mr. Chandok and Mr. Murugesh earlier. I'd like to thank you for giving your inputs right there. Yet another learning experience for our viewers. Let me remind all of you that we look forward to you participating in our survey. And up next is going to be a very, very interesting talk. And our experts will be joining us for Pledging with Leaders towards Net Zero Carbon by 2040, Innovation, Growth Trends, Challenges, and the Way Forward in just a bit.